Welcome to the second day of our Navigating the Future conference. Yesterday we started our journey around human challenges. So we discussed about food security, we discussed about energy, we discussed about the aging population. But in your business, you have another challenge, the most important one, your workforce. How will you evolve with the fact that the workforce is changing, the mentality of the people is changing? So now I will invite Sylvia and Patrick to introduce you to the future of work. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you had some time to relax after yesterday's fantastic presentations, and I hope you're ready for round two, the future of work. What does that actually mean? What is work? As everyone does nowadays, when you look for a definition, who do we go to? The all-knowing Google. And the clicker doesn't work. I'm sorry about that. And now it will work. So what is the future work? Let's ask Google. If you read Google's definition, it basically says you're doing something with your brains or your bronze for a certain result. That doesn't really help us, does it? So is this work? Working in the fields in feudal times under a king? Or is it working in a very hot factory during the Industrial Revolution? Or even welding at the top of a 100-story skyscraper in the middle of New York? Or is it more like today, sitting in an office, open space, connected to the world? As you can see, the ecosystem of work is more complex than Google. It's all about a certain location, where you work, a certain time, how long you work, how long you will work in total, how things are organized, who organizes it, but also, obviously, the tasks that you do and the skills you need to do it. But fundamentally, it all brings it together in one certain point that's central to this ecosystem. And it's about people. And so as you can see, it's not about an activity. It's about people and how they function in this ecosystem. And that's what we're going to talk to you about today. People, the essential part of work, the major disrupting forces and how things are changing. Then we'll deep dive into those 5 different pillars that we saw around people, and also move into 3 different approaches that you can have. And then we'll get personal and see where you stand.
Well, starting with the central element of work, which are people. People's idea of work is very different according to their generations. Our grandparents, for instance, they were born to work. Work was their life. For our parents, it was a bit more competitive, and being successful and growing was the same as being successful at life. We millennials, we also want to succeed, but we want to do more meaningful work. We want to make sure that our time is being well spent. And for the new generations, work is more of a means than an end. It's more about an expression of themselves and a way to learn. We usually look at generations as a separate thing, but the thing is, all these generations are coexisting right now at the workplace. Even in this conference, we have all these generations together looking at the same issues. And from what we saw yesterday, with people working longer, that will tend to continue to happen. Another thing that varies according to generations are the type of career paths that we want to pursue. There are 4 types. The linear, which is more focused on getting upwards, getting promoted, getting results and moving on the same direction and on a line. The experts, which are more narrow in scope, but tend to be very deep and very specific. A spiral career path, which is already starting to broaden a little bit the fields with job rotations and looking for development. And the transitory career path, in which the change and just being moving and the movement is the main driver. And of course, we have all these 4 types of career paths in every generation. And even the same person can have different moments on their lives with different career paths. But we tend to find the spiral and the transitory more present in the younger generations. A lot has been said about the millennials and the way we interact differently with technology, with information, with the society. And I'm sure some of you have issues trying to understand how they're going to fit the millennials in your corporation. Well, the bad news is that we are not even the worst. Actually, the new generations will have much more change. We will start to see with our generation overlapping tasks and overlapping jobs. But as the younger generations come, that will be much more natural. What we were discussing is that our grandparents and even our parents had one job for their lives. We, the millennials, will most likely have around 6 jobs throughout our careers. But the new generations will have 6 jobs at the same time, and that will be normal. Well, we're looking at career and people, but of course there are external factors influencing this new reality. Yesterday we spoke a lot about those, the digitalization and how it's present in every industry. This new cycle of automation with robots and artificial intelligence, cognitive intelligence, 3D printing, beacons, and Internet of Things. Technology is clearly in the front seat of this new reality that we're living in and influencing our society. And as our society changes and becomes more transparent and more aware and worried about sustainability and even organizing itself differently, it also demands for different technologies. And the cycle goes on. The technology disruption is something that we are already seeing. The job market is already transforming, and there are jobs that completely disappeared already. And Oxford University took a deep dive into the jobs that are most likely to be replaced by robots. For instance, receptionists and information clerks, retail salespersons, even fast food cooks. And they also found that when you're talking about an industry, for instance, and the substitution of jobs by robots, it depends still very much on the function that you do. So it's not related to niche necessarily. And another point that in our group we don't necessarily agree, we had a lot of discussions, is that according to them, the ones that are more safe and will be a bit of a bottleneck for automation are the types of jobs that require manipulation. For instance, surgeons, makeup artists, creativity like choreographers, art directors, and the ones that require some sort of social perception and even sensitivity, like nurses or psychologists. These tend to be safer. If you're curious about your job, and if you can be replaced by a robot or even just become unnecessary, BBC.com has a very cool page in which you can type in your job, and then they'll tell you the likelihood of your job disappearing. I was a bit curious myself, and I'm happy that I'll be safe because I have to pay for my MBA, at least for the next years. Well, and there's a transformation of the industries as well. It's not just about the jobs. So Russell Reynolds asked to a large group of executives, in the next 12 months, and that was actually last year, they asked, over the next 12 months, how do you see digital disruption in your industry? From moderate to massive, so only the ones that would be very impacted in the next 12 months. And as you can see, there are some differences between the industries, but none of them are safe from the disruption. It's not a matter of if you're going to be disrupted, it's more a matter of when. And it's not only digital disruption. There are also market disruptors, the players that come and change the game completely, like Uber, Airbnb, Netflix. I think it was Anne, I don't know if she's here, yesterday she was asking, how do I spot the disruptors? I mean, it's very hard to spot disruptors, but there are 3 signs that we should be aware of. The first is market complacency, when your company starts to be more on the coasting side rather than innovating. And I think we saw that a lot with cable companies. You know, you can have HBO, but then you don't have football, and then you have to pay for this channel, etc. And they're sitting there pretty, and then Netflix comes, for instance. Another thing is a customer frustration. If customers are not happy, they will look for alternatives, and they will find them. Just like what happened with Uber and taxi drivers. And another one that's more subtle are the tension points within the company. Things that are not as clear and as prioritized usually as the pain points, but it's something that you're not doing so well and you leave it for later, and then the player comes and does that very well. So keep an eye on those.
So we looked at the central pillar. Now we're going to go into the more of a deep dive of the other pillars. Location. Nowadays we have physical buildings. Companies have a headquarters, often regional offices. What do people do? They wake up in the morning, get ready, fight the traffic, get to work, sit in their defined work area for the whole day, then they fight traffic again, go home, and start again. Things are changing. Nowadays, we're looking more at a web of offices. And with that, I'd like to ask a question to you. Who has already looked at or consulted their business emails outside of the office? If you can raise your hand. In the car, in the bus. Obviously, you can see all of you. So actually, right now, you are at the office. So this is where the web of offices comes in. So computers, technology, and these things, smartphones, have actually made it possible and required in a way to work anywhere and everywhere. So the question is, this has an impact on us. Do companies need a headquarters? Do companies need to invest in expensive real estate? So this is the question I'd like to ask you. What is the real value and necessity of being on site in an office? Time is changing as well. Nowadays, we have the expression that says a 9-to-5 job. A couple of weeks of vacations a year, 5-day working week, a retirement when you're 60, 65, 70, depending on where you're from. And again, this is changing. Technology has made us 100% connected, as we just saw. Being 100% connected means you're working all the time. There's no downtime anymore. A quick question. Who accounts for these hours? Who pays for these hours that are not clocked in an office? Another thing, technology has really put life and society on fast forward. Things are happening a lot quicker. Things are evolving. Things are being ruptured here and there, disrupted here and there. We really need to follow this. We need to be connected in real time, all the time, to be able to follow this, to be able to be up to date. So what does that mean? What does that mean for all that downtime where we need it? How do we manage work-life balance in this new reality? Not only for us, but for our employees. Obviously, location, time is changing. The organizational structure of a company must allow this change. You see up here the general way a company works. You have a CEO, department heads, then often siloed departments doing certain type of jobs. Generally, large teams, more internal resources. But again, this cannot stay the same. As we saw, technology is bringing things together, connecting the world. So actually, project-based work is what's happening and what's going to be more and more common. Companies, through the fact that we're now all connected everywhere, can actually now cherry pick who works on a certain project. They'll have a project mix. The perfect project mix for the perfect project. And this comes with, obviously, a question. How do you staff something like this? When you have internal, external players, you need a more dynamic staffing system. You also need a certain type of costing system on the inside of your company. Because this, how do you function? How do you coordinate all this? And this question of coordination is the one you should take home today. What is the importance of CEO and actually HR while coordinating these project teams and project mixes? Of course, what we're doing is changing. The tasks are changing. Before we had one job, one task, routine work, which is changing. As you see here on this graph, these lines here, routine, cognitive, and routine manual are going down. They are being automated. They're being replaced by robots. But don't worry, we're not going to be taken over. Because we have something that robots don't have. We have the creativity. We have actually irrational thinking, which sometimes brings things together in a way that no robot can. We will be used to actually supervise and command what the robots and technology is doing. We will be able to bring them all together to create new value. And again, what we're doing here today, we're exchanging between humans. This is something, these interactions, is something that a robot, technology cannot do. So, technology is a reality. Robots are a reality. The question is, how will humans and technology work side by side with them, and also hand in hand? The last pillar, skills. All these things that we've talked about need new skills. Before, we have a degree-based profile, functional skills. People love labeling people. We put ourselves in drawers. I do this, I am this, and I get a certain task because that's my skill set. Things are changing. But what's important is we need to drive technology. In the Industrial Revolution, technology drove us, and there was social pain. Then we started getting control of things again, and we were in charge. And we talked about yesterday about being reactive or proactive. In skills, I would tell you, do not be reactive, because you're going to be too slow. Implementing skills takes time. So be proactive about things. So things are becoming more complex. Obviously, the skills is how to bring this complexity together, how to work with this complexity, how to connect. We're talking about connecting all over this whole 2 days. We need to learn how to connect to people, how to connect with machines, how machines connect together. A new education system is mandatory for this. Universities out there, like Singularity University, who are preparing people to work together with technology. The question is, what kind of skills are required in your company, and how do you keep them up to date?
Well, Patrick mentioned all the pillars and the transitions that are happening in all of them. But we cannot forget, however, that people react differently to the same changes. And we identified 3 types of attitudes in this changing world of work. We will have the change drivers and the change agents, the ones that will be excited in the forefront and creating things and pushing people forward. The people who will be the change followers or adapters, they will not necessarily be on the driver's seat, but they will quickly mold themselves to new realities. And also the change detached or unaware, the people who will be more at bay and may or may not change. And don't get me wrong, there are no better types than others. We will have all three of them, and we need all 3 of them. What is important here is that you understand, in your company, what type of people do you currently employ? What type of people do you need to employ? And also, what type of people you want to attract? Because that should drive your company's decisions as well. Well, so what now, right? It would be great to have a perfect answer and tell you exactly what to do and how to tackle it and what's going to happen. But the thing is, situations vary enormously according to the industry, to the company, and even to the individual. So before we go, we would like to invite you to think a little bit about your own situation. When we look at the change drivers that we mentioned and that we spoke here, in your industry, which one of those will impact you the most? What are the market trends for the next 10, 5, even 2 years? And who will the next market leader in your industry be? And why? Maybe that company doesn't even exist. Looking at your company and the pillars that we discussed, which ones are more relevant to you? This way you can prioritize. Can your company afford to not change the work culture? And are the company's decisions that are being made today leading it where it wants to go? And also looking at yourselves. In which of the 3 types do you fit in? What kind of environment would fit you best? And most importantly, are you ready to interact and collaborate with the others? Because that's something that's going to happen for sure. So our question to you is, are you ready? And however ready you think you are, Singularity University actually came up with this very sophisticated drawing. But to illustrate that when we think about change and when we think about the future, we tend to project the things that we have already seen. But when technology is in, you have an exponential growth factor, and you always have a surprise factor. So it's very likely that reality will surprise all of us. Thank you. And we would like to hear you now, hear your challenges, and I would like to invite the group to join the discussion as well.
Anyone with any questions or comments, or actually stories from your own company, how you're adapting or not adapting?
Have you found a company that has been able to manage all these layers and all these various realities that you were talking about? Is there a best practice that you can point to during your research?
There is no right answer for everybody. So we could see companies that adapted to their industries and that worked, and they became, for instance, companies that really everybody wants to work for, like Google, which is a cliche. But if you think of Google's model in other industries, not necessarily it would work. We also realize that it's not about having everything for the change drivers. There are companies that also need the current model to survive. And then, so there is no right answer.
I think it's about being adaptive. You can't always do all the different points at the same time. Sometimes you'll be able to do one more than the other. And it's the general aspect of things that is important.
And maybe to add to that, in terms of staffing, so the HR question, we could look at consulting firms who have this flexibility of creating ad hoc teams based on the projects they see. They have strong values, and then they build around that. Of course, it doesn't work for all the industries. You cannot have a manufacturing company just putting people together and say, oh, you'll try working with this machine now. But that could be an idea.
Regarding in this future of world you see, the development of skills is something that the organization has to take care, or is more something that each individual has to take care?
I would say it's more fundamental than that. I think it actually starts with school and how society adapts to this change, because it's the first place where you actually learn something. So a whole new schooling system has to be put into place, which takes time. I mean, if everything goes technology, but kids are not learning how to use technology in school, there's already a discrepancy there. And then, actually, in a company, if you see something changing, it's up to the company to allow this change, but it's also up to the individual to want this change. So it's really aligning all these different factors between school, the company, and yourself to be able to have the right skill set for the right task.
First of all, very, very good presentation, very interesting. I have a question regarding the research that you did. Did you consider some of the dilemmas around, let's say, the challenge of the Generation Z that you talked about? They were going to have a lot of different jobs. Maybe in the future they were having to mingle between 6 different jobs, as you mentioned. And also the fact that human beings have a very hard time multitasking or parallel processing, which is very ineffective. Did you think or study that deeper, how that's going to influence the productivity and the efficiency of the way people work?
Well, we didn't necessarily look deeper on the Generation Z, but the challenges are definitely there. And we also have to consider the social security challenges, because if you're not employed by a company, who's going to take care of the social security side if you're unemployed and so on? So there are a number of major challenges there, and not necessarily things that will develop for the better.
As you may remember from yesterday, my company is involved in looking at some cybersecurity challenges and the certification of cybersecurity and data protection. And we're looking at some very, very radical approaches to the marketplace. One of the questions I had was, have you looked at the testing, inspection, and certification industry for some examples of how these types of new ways of working have been done? But at the same time, are there other services industries where you may be able to give some examples in addition to what you presented here? Thank you.
So we actually did not look into your industry, but obviously you're saying that you're becoming very disruptive, so it's something that's quite interesting. Maybe if you want to tell us two minutes about it, and just what are you disrupting and how are you disrupting, to share the knowledge. We unfortunately did not look into cyber technology and the way that they're disrupting things.
Thank you. Very briefly, the standard approach in the certification industry is to set a standard. It might be global, it might be national, it might be regional. For example, under the ISO system or under the CEN, the Committee for Standardization in Europe, and then essentially to test against that standard and to give a certification to the organization that meets that standard or the product or the service or whatever. Our approach is actually to do this in a radically different way, which is to actually take the idea of the financial rating system, which exists with Standard & Poor's, which exists with Fitch's and Moody's, and apply it to cybersecurity, apply it to data protection, so that we can actually rate products and services and actual systems in a way on a scale from 0 to 5, instead of just having a simple certificate, which means you've met the minimum standard. We can actually say, well, you've met much more than the minimum standard. You've achieved a 5 in confidentiality or in integrity or in availability of the system, so that in a way you get a better ability for a company or for another organization purchasing a service or a product to be able to look at this and compare one product, one service to another service. This is actually a radical approach in that the certification industry has always gone about this in the process of setting a standard for ISO or for CEN and then actually testing to that standard. Because of what we're trying to do, actually we changed the way that everyone looks at this type of world. And unfortunately, of course, it's one of these things where, just like any other area, until you get a certain economy of scale, it's very challenging, because you can't compare apples to oranges. You can't compare our rating system to a certification system. So that's just an example of that. As you said, interestingly enough, we have a head office in Geneva, but it's only me in the head office. And then I work with 34 different people all over Europe and all over the world, and they're, the only person actually that sits in the office is me. So interestingly enough, this has already been the case for this type of industry. So my biggest costs are communications costs. So I think that there are some interesting challenges in our business. We have some very, very big players in certification, and I'm talking about SGS, Bureau Veritas, Cotecna, of which I've worked for 2 of them. So it's one of these areas that I think has a lot of potential. And I really appreciate your presentation. It actually brings to light a lot of the things that actually my company has thought about and for the future. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that input.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.